GitHub, creating and merging branches. Branches are a way of creating forks of existing code but without also creating a new repository. They are created as copies, again forking, from an existing branch and can also be merged into another. One of the most common reasons to create a branch is to test a new change in a separate, that is forked, copy of some code. So we can start with some existing code, fork a copy into a new branch, that is a copy of that code within the same repository, edit that single branch, and then also merge changes either from one branch to another or, of course, across those branches. Branches can be created very easily on GitHub, and in fact, I'll show how to do that. Once created, and as with all other forks, a pull request can be used to merge the changes from one branch to another. So we can create a branch, edit code on that branch, and then merge those changes into another branch of code. GitHub Desktop can push commits to different branches as well. So we can select, hey, I'm working on some code, I want these changes to go to this branch, or I want these changes to go to a different branch. And we can also manage branches within GitHub Desktop as well, so we can also create new branches. But let's look at that on GitHub to start. So I'm going to pull up Firefox, where I have already set up our account we've been looking at here. So I have my MD tutorial account. I want to create a new branch of code. Well, it's a little bit confusing if you're not quite used to how GitHub sees things. So the main branch of a repository is called master. Notice it says master, and then it says one branch. There is a single branch within this repository, which is pretty normal for most repositories. I though want to create a new branch based on this current single branch of code. So if I click on this dropdown where it says master, it says find or create a branch. So if I had other branches, I could view them. I don't currently have any other ones. But if I want to create one, I just give it a name. So example. And notice it changed here. It says, hey, do you want to create branch example, an example from master? So again, this will fork the code into a branch. I'm going to go ahead and click on this and tell it to do this. We'll give it just a moment, and it says, okay, branch created. Notice it gave me a little announcement up here at the top. And notice we're looking at example, and there's a total of 2 branches. This is where things can get a little bit confusing if you're not paying real close attention to how GitHub shows things. So notice how the dropdown now shows example, and the URL at the top says /tree/example. So now I have 2 different branches, and it follows the metaphor of a tree, right? We have 2 branches of a single tree being the repository. So I'm looking at example. I can click on that. I can move back to master, which is the default. The page will refresh, and I have a total of 2 branches. Okay, so I'm going to move over to GitHub Desktop for just a second and pull that up so we can look at that as well. So I'm going to fetch origin to just update. And okay, now it says current branch master. I have master, and I also have origin example here. So I can update to the default, which is where most changes will go, or I can switch to another branch. So I'm going to go ahead and select example right here, and then it will update. And it says, hey, if you want, you can create a pull request, because it notices that example and master are 2 different branches. But what I want to do, though, is I want to make some changes. I'm then going to create a commit that is a collection of those changes. I'm going to push that commit to a different branch. So I'm going to make some changes, put them all into a commit, push that commit to a different branch, and then we're going to talk about how branches can differ and how we then can merge commits, merge those changes across branches. So, okay. So tools for task is a common phrase I want to use a lot. For working with GitHub, working with Git, working with all of our manipulation of commits, we've got this tool right here, GitHub Desktop. For editing code at all, we're going to move over to Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to do that now. And I've already got this pulled up. So I want to make some new changes. Well, let's go ahead and make some changes to week 3. So down here in index, let's just make some changes. So instead of doing this right here, a render, I'm just going to make a random change where it just says hello. And I'm going to save this, which if you know the keyboard shortcuts is Control S, or of course, as always, File Save. So saving these changes. Okay, I have a new change in this file. If I move back to GitHub Desktop, Tools for Tasks, remember, move over to GitHub Desktop, it says, hey, you have a new change, and I do. And of course, you have to give a commit a summary. I changed one file. I can just accept update index.js. That's a fine summary for this. And notice it says commit to example. So I selected a different branch, not master, but example here, matching the branch I created on GitHub. I'm going to go ahead and commit this to example. And then remember, we push commits, right? Using pull and push terminology. Going to push to origin. So it's going to push that commit to the branch example. Okay, now notice this is selected right here. It says, hey, you can always create a pull request, because remember, these are forks, so we can always create a request to pull across. But let's move back to GitHub for just a second. So, okay, notice this. If I do a refresh on this, and I'm looking at master, it says, hey, your branch, that's the little symbol, your branch example had recent pushes less than a minute ago. It's telling us that now master is behind example. Remember when we talk about commits and forks, we talk about ahead or behind a number of commits. So in this case, the branch master is behind the branch example, which is what it's telling us right here. It says, hey, example just had a recent pushes. It had some commits you don't have. And so it says right here, hey, if you want to, you can compare and create a pull request. Well, we're at master, so I want to go look at example though, right? So again, using this drop down, select master, go to example. So now that I've gone to example, it says, hey, example had recent pushes 1 minute ago. So I want to compare and pull request. So I've clicked on this. And it says, hey, if you want, just like all other forks, you can change, that is, send the commits you did from this current directory, this current repository to another repository back there for the Fidelis one. We don't want to do that though. What we want to do is we want to compare forks, that is, compare branches within this single repository. So we always need to pay very close attention to what repository it's talking about and where this arrow is pointing. So I have changes that are on example, but what I want to happen is I want to merge example into master. I only want to have one branch of my code. So okay, I'll do like I frequently do, and what I want to do is select MD tutorial. And then notice it disappeared again, but that's okay, because now it said, hey, it looks like you are comparing example, notice the little arrow, comparing example to base master, right? So again, pay attention to where the arrow is pointing, right? We're comparing example to master. So whatever changes, commits are over here in example will flow to master. That arrow is always very important there. So okay, I've got some commits on the branch example. I want to move those, apply those changes to my other branch master. So I'm going to create a pull request like we do with forks, because remember, branches are just forks as well, just within a single repository. Create a new pull request, and then say, okay, do you want to merge these changes into master from example? So notice it's telling you what exactly you're doing, and notice it's green, so everything's, we can do that. So merge, confirm. Okay, now look at this. It says pull request successfully merged and closed. You're all set. The example branch can be safely deleted. This is important here because it's now telling you, hey, you created a branch and the assumption was you were going to do something with it. But now that master, the default branch, and example, the other branch, are synchronized, it assumes you probably don't want example anymore. And in fact, we don't, because now we've synchronized it, right? So I'm going to go ahead and click delete branch. And it says, okay, you deleted the example branch now, right? The exact time it did that. Let's go over to code. Notice we're back down to one branch, right? We're still ahead of Fidelis master, which is totally cool, right? We can be ahead of commits of that. That is absolutely fine. So, okay, we started with a branch, right? Then we moved over to GitHub Desktop and selected that branch, right? Then we created some changes to the code, packaged those changes into a commit, push that commit to a branch, that separate branch we created. Then on GitHub, went in, created a pull request from changes from the new branch to back to the master branch. So if you ever get changes that apply on one branch, but you actually need them on the other, remember you can create a pull request paying attention to that arrow, right? Where is the changes flowing? In GitHub, they flow right to left, which is a little bit confusing, but we need to pay attention to what that arrow is, right? Flowing from right to left, where we, okay, take these changes from example and what I showed, apply them to master in this case, and then we deleted that branch. So again, branches can be incredibly helpful, especially when creating them very easily in GitHub, if we want to work with some code and fork within a repository. We can also, like all forks we worked with, create pull requests on GitHub to merge those changes from one branch to another, and then when they are synchronized, GitHub gives us the option to simply delete that other branch as we did right here. So if you end up in a case where you have some commits, you have some changes on a branch, and you actually want them in the master branch, you can again create a pull request, merge those changes, and then just delete that extra branch if you don't need it. And unless you really know what you're doing, in most cases you probably don't need a lot of extra branches unless you're maintaining extra versions of code, like a 1.0 or a 2.0 versions, where you have multiple versions, multiple branches of this different code base. Usually you create a branch, as I mentioned in the introduction, do some changes or maybe test some stuff, and if you like those changes, apply them to the master branch, just like we've been doing with forks. You create a pull request, merge those changes in. So this has been a review of how to handle, that is, branches within GitHub. We can create them very easily, and if we have them, we don't necessarily want them, we can create pull requests and merge those commits across forks as we've been doing so far.